Hello, I'm back with another video. And Before I start this one, I just want to say that I'm uh, I'm stepping up to challenge in this video and with this channel and challenging myself to continue creating content that is coming from a place of inspiration and truth to both further inspiration and truth. So I'm challenging myself to continue creating content, also bringing up challenging and daring topics that are sensitive, but I think are important to the realities that we face as just as people in general, but also as artists and people who are interested in creativity and more specifically like with songwriting with this channel. So I want to say that I'm stepping up to challenge in creating these, but I also am want to be respectful and bow before the spirit of life and the spirit of truth. But this video is a follow-up to my previous video discussing violence and peace. And In that, I think I had a insight that dawned on me that I think can tie into that video. In that video, I put out a disclaimer that is some of my takes on violence as a person who isn't who I belong to a demographic of people in the place where I live in the United States that experiences a higher risk of violence in different metrics. So I'm speaking from that perspective, but also having sustained violence in different degrees at different times in my life. And I also put forward in that video that I think that a significant degree of carelessness on my part is related to the times that I've experienced violence. But what I wanted to say is that in tying back that video with violence, I had mentioned two very prominent features that I think are part of the violence that is proliferated in American society, but maybe to a more pronounced degree in the African American community. But that by no means excludes other communities, because I think none of us are immune from violence. But what I wanted to say is that, and I also put out the disclaimer that these statements are by no means to be comprehensive, but I think that that some of these things that I'm mentioning might be play a significant part in the violence that we see. So one is that I mentioned if I could bring the violence in the Black community for young Black males to three prominent features, they would be these. Two of these I mentioned in that first video. One is the subconscious replication of the power arrangements facilitated by the whip in the time of slavery, being continued and reenacted subconsciously and maybe culturally with the firearm as a means of applying rapid and instant consequences for different breaches of social conduct, whether righteous or not, where a person can be called and reprimanded with deadly and permanent force instantly in the time of slavery with the whip, but then now with the firearm as a feature in American culture and society as a continuation of that power dynamic in that implement of the whip being the firearm currently. Then I also spoke about as another feature of the whip is the sex appeal of the whip, where I mentioned that many adults in a private setting, like in a bedroom, can maybe find can maybe be stimulated with some of the power that comes from the whip in a bedroom setting, but then that can equally apply outside of the bedroom in the maybe the subconscious image of a whip that a firearm conveys, and just the sexiness of a firearm in broad society, from some of the dark appeal of a firearm being a what has become a collective fetish in humanity. I want to say in American society, but then going broadly because America exports culture around the world. As one of the I've heard it said, I can't quote the source, but that uh, culture is a chief export of American society. So the theme of the firearm has become like a fetish in my opinion, and so that combination of the power arrangements that are the the social and power arrangements that are kept in place, that are both held in place but also stimulated and shifted by the application of instant violent force, formerly being the whip, but then currently the firearm. But then also with that, the sex appeal and the dark appeal of the firearm being another force in itself that combines with the social function of it in maintaining and shifting power dynamics, but then becoming a force running away on its own, being the fetish. But then this is the third aspect that I think ties into that I wanted to put forward with that, and that I think is it's it's very daring to say this, but in speaking with truth, I think it has to do with the violence that we see, which is that so we think about like the violence that surrounds hip hop, and then the violence of American society in general, and then the violence within the Black community. And I think that we can never discount the trauma and the dynamics that are that have been put in place, and the cycles that have been put in place by the nature for many of us African Americans in American society, being brought here against our will. Now, I myself am I consider myself a first generation African American in that so I'm both African and American. I have ancestry from Africa, and I was born first generation. My parent immigrated from Africa, but then one of my parents, and then another one of my parents was an American citizen, and had a few generations back of American ancestry, but then before that was an immigrant themselves from Europe. So I said that both technically I'm both African and American, but then also I've been reared in American society with the appearance of an African American, and many of the experiences of being an African American, having close friends and loved ones that were African American, growing up and spending time in African American communities, like the church. I went to a predominantly African American church as a later in childhood, and then I meant to say that in many different ways, I view myself as being African American, but I've also had experiences that are related to me being perceived as an African American, both within African American communities, but also outside of that community, and being viewed as an African American in other in other communities. But what I wanted to say is that that dynamic of of African Americans being brought here against their will, it plays out in many ways, and I think that the so the the media personality, but also intellectual and outspoken thinker, Judge Joe Brown. And I've watched many interviews with him over the years. He kind of appears on. Sometimes he's very gracious in lending interviews to different channels and media people who are maybe not as prominent, but that he respects. So there are, if you look up Judge Joe Brown online, there are very interesting interviews with him, with people who may not be famous, but are still full-fledged journalists that are able to garner profound insights in speaking with him. And one thing that he mentioned in another video is that us being African people of African descent, during the time of slavery, we were recognized as having certain whether personal or physical attributes that made us very strong and able to withstand some of the brutalities and the sufferings that were involved in slavery, but also in doing so to be valuable in a commercial sense and having a output of labor that was profound. Some of our genetic gifts and heritage being of African descent. But what he mentions is that at some point, our presence in American society has become redundant from the purposes that we were brought here under, this conditions we were brought here under. Like with the I'm getting a little bit past my actual background and scope of understanding with history, but I understand that there have been improvements in technology, such as like the cotton gin, different points of the Industrial Revolution, and then the digital age that have made some of our labor and output redundant on certain senses, to where we're almost like, if you can imagine, like, and I don't mean this with any disrespect, but a someone that has been brought to like a guest or a party. But so I want to say like outlasting our welcome for, and that's I don't mean that in an ugly way, but I just mean that the circumstances that brought us here no longer exist, but we're still here. So in some senses, I feel like as an African American person, I don't always maybe we don't completely fit into the society, and we don't have we don't have the commercial value in a capitalist system that we once had based on our labor. And so because of that, we're marginalized and almost maybe viewed by the status quo dominant society as a redundant group, and which plays into the mass incarceration and the criminal justice complex, from Judge Joe Brown's angle, which is he was saying he's said in different interviews on YouTube that some of the dynamics around mass incarceration of African American males are a sophisticated mechanism of almost like rounding us up, and then making us so we're for, to maximize our labor output. And I think it's been said that when a person is incarcerated, the amendment that gave African American people freedom does not apply to people who are incarcerated. So being incarcerated is like another form of slavery, and it's a continuation of that. The fact that in the free society, we can be almost marginalized as though we were redundant, and then to round us up into the prisons. But then there are for those of us who may not be incarcerated, I think that there's still, the society views us somewhat as being redundant, and so what I want to say, and this is a bold statement, but if you look at some of the themes that are popular in hip hop music, many of it centering around fratricide, like black on black crime. I would almost go so far as to say that some of the dynamics that exist between, and I'm not saying any that this is entirely conscious or completely designed, but some of the dynamics around music, and then the violence in our communities is almost a mechanism where the popularity, the money, and the appeal of the music is almost sponsoring the violence, to where people can so when people are perpetrating black on black crime, they are they are meeting a need of the dominant society in it's almost like it's almost like to say that our genocide is being sponsored, and then these violent acts are we can't a person that's participating in black on black crime cannot assault a black person and then go to a bank or a check cashing place and redeem a coupon or a voucher, but they can then make different music and art that has popularity that is based on the authenticity of the acts that they've perpetrated. So in a sense, they are being compensated for black on black crime So I'm saying that in a certain sense, the combination of the violence and the music is like it's like a feedback loop where we're being sponsored to eliminate one another in our redundancy, in a greater effort to serve the status quo and the dominant society that does not entirely need us on a broad sense. I think during the time of slavery, many of like the just the regular like a maybe a slave who was not outstanding in some sense would be viewed in one sense, but there was always like studs. I think like slaves that were rewarded with they were compensated maybe with wives or economic opportunities. So there have always been certain outstanding like a stud class, which might be some of the people that are benefiting from the violence and some of the music, where then the other rank and file are the ones that are brutalized and sacrificed in this greater dynamic. So I think that this the music is almost like a sponsoring of some of the fratricide, um, that is a means where us as African American men who may not have a footing in the society to participate in some of the American pie, like the greater lifestyles that we all aspire to, by by eliminating one another, we can get a piece of that greater pie. And is as dark as that might sound, and so I think that that dynamic, and then just the influence of that dynamic existing, further emanates and reach and goes into the community, and then regular people imitate that, and it just exacerbates the crime. I'm sorry, the violence. So I just wanted to say that in a certain sense, these are the three pillars that I recognize in our plight as African Americans within the violence, is the continuation of the whip, the sex appeal of the whip, and then the sponsoring of black on black crime, in reducing our numbers as we're being viewed as being redundant, in kind of like just this dark fetish that we have with violence. So I know that these are very bold statements, but I think that that's my take as a person living in the United States. And I offer these with respect to all people, whatever wherever you come from, whatever your background, whatever your experiences. But I think that these are some of the dynamics that we're experiencing, and I hope that being aware of these can be a first step in moving past them, because I think that life is really beautiful, and I think that violence is not the answer, and I think that we're we we're better than that, and when we hurt one another, we hurt ourselves. So I just I offer these in the spirit of life, peace, and truth, and I submit this with humility. Peace.